Do you have this?
Yes, I have it. Hold on one second. Sorry.
That's okay.
All right. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. You're
There we
awesome.
go. Okay, so let's move to the next slide.
Brother. There we go.
We'll work out our technical issues here. So I want to start with a quick overview of the topics that we're planning to cover tonight. We'll start with an update on the community survey, and then we'll have a report out from our meeting with the Coastal Commission. And then I want to talk a little bit about the city's 80 accessory dwelling unit regulations, possible changes to the highway, commercial, and multifamily residential zoning regulations, and lastly, development possibilities of the vacant city-owned property across from City Hall. So we're a little constrained by the Zoom format, but our hope is that folks will ask us questions, provide comments, and we'll leave some space for that to happen after each of the presentation topics. I ask you all to please keep your microphones on mute when you're not speaking, just so we don't start racing around after chasing background noise. If you could use the raised hand feature if you want to speak, that helps us call on people, though I will say sometimes it's hard to keep an eye on everyone on the Zoom, especially if we have a presentation going as well. So if you have your hand up and we're not calling on you, just speak out, help us out, okay? So once again, thank you. We'd really like to hear from you this evening, and we have a lot of ground to cover, so we're just going to dive in. And Elias is going to start with an update on the community survey. Next slide, please.
Okay, great. Thank you all for being here. I'm excited to debut some preliminary results of the survey. Most of you here are probably familiar with this process and have been following along, but just so you know, just as by way of review, there are two surveys that we've been conducting over the last several months, a community survey and a property owner survey, just to really take the temperature of different people in our community around issues related to housing. So today we're going to take a high-level look at the community survey. We're going to go over the results so far of 9 out of the 19 questions. We're still expecting more responses, including from you or from people that you know. And the final report will be at the December City Council meeting, and that'll include a report on both surveys. Today we're going to focus on the community survey. That report will go in depth on all the questions that are, that are asked in those surveys. And we'll dive much deeper. We'll be able to explore cross correlations. So we'll be able to answer questions like, what did respondents under 50 feel was the city's top housing priority? Or how do renters living within the city feel about vacation rental policy? So we'll be able to do some of those cross correlation questions. How did people who answered this on question A feel about question B? We're not going to do that today. We're just going to look at some of the top level results. And then at the December meeting, we'll dig much, much deeper. Okay, so first I want to talk a little bit about our outreach strategy. As you know, the next slide we'll talk about the response rates. We had excellent response rates, and I think a lot of it we owe to our outreach strategy, to the staff at the City of Point Arena, the team of consultants, and our community partners, and probably to a ton of other people who have been forwarding this via email and passing it along through their networks. So we're grateful to everyone who helped us here. I want to talk a little bit about our outreach. So first, bilingual everything. That means our press release was bilingual, our website is bilingual, our social media posts are bilingual, flyers, bilingual posters that you've probably seen around town, bilingual, and the surveys, both of them are available in both English and Spanish. Okay, we've lost our slide deck. Paul, I think I'm seeing something else on your screen. Yeah, so again, just to walk through this, we, in addition to social media, email, and web, We put posters all around town. We distributed 1,000 handout-sized flyers, two-sided, one in English, one in Spanish. Some of those were distributed by our community partners. Some were available at locations throughout the city. Those had QR codes on them, as did the posters. We did outreach through the schools. We sent another 1,000 flyers, essentially home with students through the schools to take back to their parents. We also did an every door direct mailing. If you live anywhere close to the city of Point Arena, your mailbox or PO box was probably stuffed with one of these flyers with QR codes and information about the survey. And also I want to give a big shout out to our community partners. So that's the Mindanoma Health Alliance, Action Network, and SCORE, who are all instrumental both in helping us put the survey together in the first place and in helping us roll it out successfully. So big tip of the hat to those guys. We really appreciate all that you do. Let's see, anything else I want to say about this slide? I guess the last thing I would say is this really was a full court press. This is everything we could think of to do to get it out there. And potentially it can be a blueprint for future outreach efforts, given the success we had. Okay, let's check out the next slide. So the community survey had 164 responses to the English version, 5 to the Spanish. These results were pulled a few days ago. We have another handful of responses just since then. The property owner survey, we have 23 responses. Those are all people who own property within the city. We sent letters to all of them, by the way, too. So again, I would say that this response really exceeded our expectations. I think we're all really pleased with this, but that doesn't mean that we're not hoping to get more. I do want to reference one other thing, which is you might notice there's a big discrepancy between the English and Spanish responses. As we all know, there are a lot of Spanish speakers who live in Point Arena and the surrounding area. We were a little bit concerned about this, and we do plan to do more in the coming days to outreach to the Latin American and Hispanic community, including a listening session with Action Network, but with a translator on hand. But I do want to say I was talking with Micheline at the Mindanoma Health Alliance. They did a huge community survey recently, and they had a similar result where they had a Spanish version. It wasn't getting a ton of responses. She said when they went out and they reached out to people in the Spanish-speaking community, a lot of those people said, well, yeah, we saw there was a Spanish version. We're bilingual. We just did the English version. So I wouldn't necessarily take this response discrepancy to mean that we're not reaching the Spanish-speaking population. A lot of those households happen to be bilingual. Okay, so we are going to cut off submissions to the community survey on November 11th. So if you want to make a last second push, if you see some of these results and you say, oh, those are all wrong, I got to get my people out to say something else, November 11th is when we're going to close this. All right, let's check out the next slide. Okay, so we're going to get into some of the questions. We'll move fairly quickly through these. And we'll just talk a little bit about what we're pulling.
Yeah, fill it up and actually just turn it on. The light doesn't work, but it does go on.
Okay, I think iPad 9 maybe should mute their iPad. Okay, so we'll move through these pretty quickly. Again, we're not going to get into super great depth yet. That'll be at the December meeting. So let's back this up to the first of these responses. How old are you? So as you can see, like our community, our responses skew older. This isn't shocking, but the fact that we do have a good number of responses under 49, I think is encouraging. But as you can see, 65 and older really running away with it in terms of the responses. Let's take a look at the next slide. Okay, so where do you live? This survey is open to people who live outside of the city of Point Arena. There are a lot of people who live in the area but rely on the city for services, shopping, schools, etc. So we have an option for that. There are other people who are invested in the city of Point Arena for all sorts of other reasons. And we want to capture their input too, but we want to make sure that we understand the demographics of where our different responses are coming from, because in some cases, these people who are inside the city of Point Arena, well, we really want to hear from them on some of these questions. Okay, let's check out the next one. Okay, so home ownership, a lot of homeowners, fewer renters, still 48 renters. This is one I'm interested in unpacking when we do the cross correlations. How many of these renters live in the city of Point Arena versus homeowners? And I think that will tell us that'll help us tell some interesting stories about the data. Okay, let's check out the next slide. Okay, so income levels, as you can see, we have a pretty good range, all the way from people who are living, below the poverty line to people who are relatively wealthy. We want to hear from everyone, so this is encouraging. And you can see we have a pretty good spread across the board. Next slide. Okay, so here we'll get into some of the opinion questions. Where we're really taking the community's temperature on different questions relating to housing and to the LCP amendment process we're undergoing here. So here we ask, the city should focus on developing, and we give people 5 options. It's called the Likert scale question. They can strongly agree, either disagree, or strongly disagree. So that gives people the option, not just to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down, but to register the strength of their preference as well. It's just a little bit more finely grained than some other survey methods. So as you can see, a lot of people just want us, they're like, please just develop something. The only thing that doesn't have at least 50% support is mobile home parks. So maybe not that we're hearing, but again, you see rental housing is over 90% of respondents are responding positively to rental housing. So this is really interesting data for us. Again, some of the cross correlation stuff is going to be fascinating, but I think just as a top line lesson from this, the people who are responding to the survey are really positive about the city working to develop housing. Let's take a look at the next slide. Okay, so the city should focus on developing for. This is an interesting one. A huge majority of people said low income households. So you can see that as over 78% response. By the way, the reason these don't add up to 100% is because people can check more than one box. But you also see a lot of support for developing housing for homeless people and for seniors. I don't take this to mean that people aren't positive about other sorts of development, but just as a matter of prioritization, this is what respondents to the survey are telling us is most important to them. Next slide. So this is a really interesting question. This is about vacation rentals, and we're taking people's temperature on a number of different questions regarding vacation rentals. And what's interesting to me here is the kind of maximalist position, vacation rentals should be prohibited within city limits, does not have a lot of support. Not even a quarter of respondents responded positively to the idea of prohibition on vacation rentals. And you see at the top, there are a lot of people who want a sensible policy around vacation rentals, essentially. So say maybe there should be some limit, maybe there should be some discussion around that. It shouldn't just be unlimited. But you don't see people advocating for prohibition. I also want to direct your attention to the 4th question here, which says, I am familiar with the city's current vacation rental regulations. Less than or around 30% of people indicated that they're familiar. Less than 10% strongly indicated that they really felt like they're familiar. So this tells us that there's something of an education gap here. There are a lot of people who just don't know what the policy is around vacation rentals. That's valuable knowledge for us as we go through this process. That's something that we can take head on and try to address through our outreach strategy and communications. Let's check out the next slide. Okay, so I know Linda's going to talk a little bit more about the city-owned parcel across from City Hall. We did take people's temperature on what sort of development they would like to see here. Apartments and co-housing have a lot of support. This is one where we ask people to select only one response, and you can see when asked to select just one thing, apartments, co-housing, basically using it to house multiple people, more than just single family homes. Over 50% of respondents prioritize that. So again, emphasize preliminary. We're not drawing any conclusions yet. We're going to get more into the weeds in December. We expect more responses by then. But this is interesting, right? This is interesting data, and it's the kind of thing we're excited to unpack after that November 11th cutoff. Let's check out the next slide. Okay, primary locations for residential development. So a number of interesting things to pull out of here, but the biggest thing that leaps out is both responses that are over 50% in terms of positive response are development on vacant lots in the city. So you see a lot of people saying, hey, there are vacant lots, there is land in the city. Let's build there first. So I don't want to draw too many conclusions from that at this point, but that's interesting. And that does seem to be where the bulk of respondents are focusing their energy. Okay, one more slide. Okay, so there are a bunch of other things that we asked about on the survey, and we're not going to get into those because of time constraints today. I know I'm already over time, but we're going to talk about household size. We're going to talk about rent costs, the condition of homes, what people feel are the barriers to development of new housing. And there's also an additional comment box. And we have, as of last count, 74 comments in that box, which means, you know, almost half of respondents are giving us other comments. And we've taken a cursory look through those comments at this point, and they are very detailed. They're very interesting. They're heartfelt. They're really valuable, essentially, to all of us. So, so thank you for those additional comments to people who wrote those. And those are going to have a lot of value in this process too. Okay, so a few takeaways. I do just want to reiterate again, none of this is set in stone. We have a lot of work to do in unpacking this, in analyzing this data, and in bringing it back to you in December. And then the last thing I'll say is, hopefully some of you guys in hearing this feel motivated to go out and encourage more people, to mobilize more people to take the survey. Maybe you feel like some of these results so far seem totally off base. Your friends must not have filled it out yet. Well, go talk to them, check on that. And hopefully by that November 11th cutoff date, we'll have even more responses. Okay, so that's my presentation. This is really exciting. I'm excited about the results and excited to report them all to you again in December. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Eli. So before we move on, we're going to pause to see if anyone has questions or comments. I saw Olivia put a comment in the chat. If anyone wants to speak, just raise your hand or chime in, and otherwise, oh, Olivia.
Hi, I just wanted to say I didn't want to like only have that be my only comment because I know it was just about that one particular item. But yeah, I was like, let's not make absolute statements yet. Yeah, I just want to say really appreciate the work that's gone into this. And as you know, like a lot of us have been on the ground really helping to try to get as many people as possible to fill this out. And we actually weren't sure if the cutoff date was today or not, so we did as big of a push as we could at the Oz Harvest Festival last weekend, and dropped a bunch of paper ones off yesterday. But so I don't know if those are reflected in here yet. So that was one question. I see Linda shaking her head. So those ones aren't reflected in here yet. Okay, that's awesome. And then yeah, so I just want to say thank you and good to know about November 11th. And then I just wanted to ask if from here we're going to go into like what the next steps are from this survey and kind of what we're working on between now and November 11th and then from November 11th.
Yeah, so you came in after the introduction where I kind of went through what we're going to talk about.
I apologize. Okay,
So that's okay.
I don't want to waste anyone else's time. So
no, but we have a lot of substance.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll look at the beginning of the recording. I apologize.
That's okay. In fact, I can put that list in the chat because I'm going to turn it over to Michelle to talk about our meeting. Oh, wait, before we do that, Lisa has her hand up. Lisa. You're on mute. We're still not hearing you.
I am muted. I'm so sorry. I had to turn up volume too. I didn't expect you to call on me that quickly. I am not sure, I know this sounds ridiculous, what I filled out. Now I know exactly what I filled out, but I'm a landowner, but I don't know that I filled out, I didn't realize there was a difference in surveys. So I believe I only filled out one survey. Do you want me to fill out 2 surveys? One is a
Yeah, so-
landowner and one is an interested party?
Yeah, as a community member, we definitely encourage you to fill out the community survey. As
I
a
did
property
that.
owner, there's a separate survey. Yeah, and I know the messaging around this was difficult, and it's something that we tried to walk that tightrope, but I'm sure for some people it was confusing or our messaging didn't land. Both surveys are available on the city's website. So pointarena.ca.gov/housing, or if you just go to the city's website, it's in the right-hand corner, the housing, just click there.
Okay.
And both surveys are available there.
Okay, I didn't want to double dip, Elias. I thought I'd be double dipping. So, okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, the surveys are completely distinct. There's some overlap, but they have quite different questions relating to different things. So it's not double dipping to take both.
This is really exciting. Thank you for doing it. We're thrilled. We're thrilled. Thank you.
All right, Olivia.
To that point, because I saw Jennifer also asked about the other survey, I'm wondering if you don't mind reiterating the purpose or reason for having two. I do, like, my initial thought or concern about there being only, like, there's a general community survey and then a specific property owner survey. It just feels as though, and with you just now acknowledging that property owners will then have two places and opportunity to put their input into, it feels like there's deeper emphasis on the property owners having like their say, when it feels like the renters within the city limits and community are the ones who really need their voice heard based on like what has historically occurred within the city. And so, yeah, I'm just a little like wondering if you can reiterate exactly what the purpose is, because it doesn't feel like the power dynamics are very balanced with the property owners having two opportunities to have like their own survey and the community-wide survey, when everyone in the community should maybe have an equal say. So that's all.
Well, I would start by saying, I think if you take a look at the property owner survey, you'll realize that it's very distinct from the community survey. The community survey is asking the community members to really take their temperature and figure out how they feel about key issues of housing. The property owner survey, and I'll let Linda expand on this in a moment, but it's really focused on issues around development. And, you know, as we move forward with the LCP process, property owners are going to need to be partners in some of this, in terms of, you know, they own the land, right? And so to some degree, there are some questions that are going to be more specifically of interest to property owners. And I think if you go on our website and you look through the property owner survey, I think it'll be immediately pretty apparent why we didn't ask some of those questions of everybody. And I don't think it's a matter of putting a finger on the scales in any direction. It's more just, there are certain questions that pertain more directly to property owners. Linda, do you want to expand on that?
Well, the other thing I wanted to add to that is we're not going to blend the data. So, you know, there's plenty of opportunity to kind of look at it as two distinct data sets. But I think, Eli, I think you really covered the main point, which is that we asked different questions of the property owners, and we did require them to identify their properties and put their name, you know, so we actually know who is saying what, which will be helpful if we, you know, if we have comments from them or if we want to follow up. So,
although I do want to add to that before we publicize any data from the property owner survey, it will be aggregated and anonymized. So we're not going to be attaching anyone's name to their responses publicly, just to be clear.
Right. Thank you for that. That was an assurance that was provided. Lonnie has her hand up.
Hi, thank you. I just was curious because I'm a property owner, but I'm outside the city limits, but I still have a Point Arena address. Is that a survey? Can I fill out the survey? Or is it only for people within the city limits? Property owners within the city limits?
That's a really good question. You probably could. Like, I don't think the survey instrument is going to shut you down as long as you put your address and your name in.
Okay, and my other question
But
was,
let me just say that we solicited property owner input by sending a letter from the mayor to each of the property owners. in the city. And that
Okay.
was really the limits of it.
Okay, understood. And my other question is because I went onto the city's website and I only see one survey available on the like right-hand side of the main page. So how does one access the property owner survey from the city's website?
If you look in the chat, I just dropped the link to our housing page, and this really is the end all and be all of housing resources. So if you go there, you'll find both the community housing survey and the property owner survey, English and Spanish.
Okay, great.
See upcoming events. You can join our housing email list. You can find recordings of all of these meetings, links to key, the housing amendments, all the background materials for this process. So it's a good one as all of you are interested in this process. It's a good web page to bookmark.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so let's move on to the next slide. And Michelle Nielsen is going to report out on a meeting that we had with the California Coastal Commission a couple of weeks back.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here and giving a summary of our September meeting with the Coastal Commission. So there's 4 key takeaways that we were very excited to hear our dialogue with the Coastal Commission. First being the Coastal Commission is willing they were open to the idea of establishing a more refined approach to the Point Arena mountain beaver habitat, the protection zone and buffer. Currently that buffer is 500 feet. And the current regulations, how they apply is there isn't consideration for the environmental setting. So what happens is that there ends up being Point Arena mountain beaver habitat studies conducted for infill development projects that are not in proximity to a water body or the kind of vegetation that the beavers like. So the map that's on your screens, the yellow area, that's actually a 100-foot buffer, and the buffer for habitat buffer for the mountain beaver is 500 feet. So it actually encroaches into parts of the downtown area. The Coastal Commission expressed a willingness to review and update the current Point Arena regulations for the species. The city has started the process of coordinating with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to develop a more refined approach. This includes using modern technical information from a subject matter expert about the species. And our hope is we can come up with standard mitigation measures that can be implemented for construction noise protections, and that we can shrink the buffer zone to something that more approximates the boundaries of the known and potential Point Arena mountain beaver habitat. And I think Linda has a little bit to add on this too.
Yeah, so late breaking news. We got an email today from Greg Schmidt, who's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service biologist who does all the Point Arena mountain beaver surveys. He is the subject matter expert. And I had reached out to him to kind of get the conversation rolling about these potential changes to the buffer. Because honestly, for the Coastal Commission to express like a willingness to do this, it's an opportunity you just want to seize. And so I got a message back from Greg this morning, which in part said, I welcome a thorough review of the city's Point Arena mountain beaver protection guidelines and comparison with the service's no-take guidelines. I am especially wanting to clear up the issue with the 500-foot distance. I plan to revise our draft guidelines this week, so the timing of this is perfect. My changes to the services guidelines will reflect what I have learned about the subspecies over the past few years after spending hundreds of hours conducting habitat assessments, presence, absence surveys, and baseline occupancy surveys throughout the subspecies range. So anyways, we're gonna take on the Point Arena mountain beaver habitat or buffer issue, and I think it's looking promising.
So next slide, please. So another potentially exciting development coming out of our meeting with the Coastal Commission was the possible use of the city's existing categorical exclusion order to fully exempt certain classes of ADUs from the requirement of getting a coastal development permit. And the criteria you see listed on this slide, these are from the city's existing categorical exclusion order. And so some of the qualifications that that ADUs that we could be looking at is east of the first public road, a detached ADU, parcels already developed with an existing single family residence, less than 500 square feet in size and less than 15 feet in height. There would be limits on grading and utility connections, and there's standards also that would still be in effect with respect to construction and development near streams and also wetlands and wetland buffers. So those restrictions and limitations would still be in effect. Those as they are currently under the city's categorical exclusion order. Next slide, please. So we also talked about the Hay annexation area, and the Coastal Commission expressed a willingness to consider modifications in the phasing requirements. Currently, the LCP requires phasing of the annexation area that would start with development of properties off the end of Mill Street. And right now, more than 15 years have passed since this area was annexed and no residential development has occurred. And that was part of the impetus for, having this on the agenda and talking to the Coastal Commission about it. Our thinking is rather than prescribing where development must start, we could establish performance measures and let the property owners propose where they would like to develop first. While the Coastal Commission is open to phasing the development of this area, they emphasize that it will require thoughtful consideration of the timing for bringing in roads, water, and sewer that would serve that development. And next slide, please. And so our fourth big takeaway from this first coordination meeting with the Coastal Commission was just how to balance the need for affordable housing, workforce housing, and the Coastal Act priorities for visitor serving facilities. The Coastal Commission staff recognizes there's a need to balance these two uses, and that oftentimes the workforce that is employed and supports visitors serving businesses, they're unable to afford to live in or near the communities where they work. So there's recognition of that. And they do now do have somewhat of an equity lens because the Coastal Act's primary purpose is to provide the public access to the coast, to not have, entrance fees and that sort of thing. So as part of their prioritization with coastal access and visitor serving facilities, they do emphasize low-cost visitor serving facilities over those that are not low cost, that are more expensive. So we're going to continue. So this was our first meeting. We're scheduled to meet with them again next month and continue to ensure we're all pulling in the same direction as much as possible as we continue with this LCP amendment.
All right, so before we move on, do we have any questions or comments about any of the topics that Michelle just reported on? All right, seeing none, we're gonna move on. Oh, Olivia.
Sorry, really quick, I put it in the chat, but just so I don't ask it later. So with the mountain beaver survey, will Fish and Wildlife have more opportunities to actually just survey the properties that are bordering the Point Arena Creek right now? And just understand how they've been maintained and just like what's going on with the creek there? Or is that completely separate?
Yeah, so I don't actually know the answer for that.
Okay, no worries. Maybe that's a question we can
I'm
follow
not
up
gonna
on
make
in
it.
the next week with Fish and Wildlife. So no worries.
Yeah, but we can find out. I mean, the fact that he has spent hundreds of hours over the last few years doing mountain beaver surveys makes me think he's pretty familiar with the habitat along Point Arena Creek. And the other area actually where you have habitat in the city is on Windy Hollow Road. So, Lonnie.
Hey, so I was just wondering if it's the same question I had before. Is that only within the city limits or in the unincorporated areas of Point Arena as
Yeah.
well?
So we're only looking at modifying the local coastal program for the city of Point Arena. So, but what I will say is that the work that Greg is doing right now is he said he's going to have a draft up by like next week, is he's modifying the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service guidelines, which I assume would apply outside of the city of Point Arena too. I mean, they're looking at protecting the Point Arena mountain beaver habitat, and he's trying to modify their guidelines so that they achieve that goal while not, being overly regulatory.
Yeah, which I understand. I guess it's like, I know that you guys are operating within the city limits, but it seems like a majority of the population lives outside of the city limits. And if someone like me as a property owner wanted to provide more housing, I'm in the Coastal Commission, even though I'm miles away from the ocean. You know what I mean? And so it would be, it's still very prohibitive for me. And so it's, and for many others. So I guess that's, still like thousands more people live outside of the actual city limits.
Yeah, I hear you. And, I mean, the city has its own regulatory structure. What we're doing, our work is for the city, but I would hope that it would be applicable to the county if they wanted to modify their regulations. And I know they are looking at potentially updating the county LCP.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. And this is, I'm just going to dive into accessory dwelling units, and it's a complicated topic, one that we actually spent a lot of time talking with the Coastal Commission about. So let me just give you a little bit of history. So, one area where both the state legislature, the Coastal Commission, and the Point Arena City Council have all taken a proactive role in trying to promote affordable housing is in adopting laws, guidelines, and regulations to encourage the development of accessory dwelling units, ADUs, as a means of providing low-cost rental housing opportunities. The city of Point Arena currently has regulations in its LCP that were adopted back in 2006 that permit ADUs in some zoning districts, subject to certain limitations, and including the requirement to get both a conditional use permit and a coastal development permit. So a few years back, our state legislature started passing legislation to require cities and counties to allow ADUs and junior accessory dwelling units and to streamline the permitting process. And in response to that, the city of Point Arena amended its ADU ordinance in 2020 and submitted it to the Coastal Commission for certification, which is their final approval in 2021. At that point, the Coastal Commission responded with what is a pretty typical response, which is like a 9-page letter with requesting all kinds of additional information and with lots of questions. And at that point, or soon thereafter, the city decided to fold the ADU amendments into our current LCP update process. So we've had a chance to talk through all of the Coastal Commission's comments with their staff. And one thing that I will say is that they've had some turnover in their staff, and I think in some ways there's like kind of a kinder, gentler staff position, which is awesome. We did a lot of brainstorming about how to respond to the issues that they raised. They walked back some of the more onerous requirements for special studies. And it's really clear that they want to help the city get the LCP amendment for ADUs certified as quickly as possible. So that said, as we dug into the ordinance, there's a lot that needs to be updated based on new ADU legislation that has been adopted in the past couple of years. And there's also some changes that we'll be recommending to simplify the structure of the ordinance so that it's more easy to understand and to modify the procedures to make them simpler and so forth. So we'll be conducting a work session with the City Council in December and expect at that point to have well-developed recommendations on revisions to the city's 2020 ADU ordinance. If possible, we'd like to move the ADU ordinance forward for Coastal Commission certification in advance of the other amendments that are part of our housing update process, just because it's been on the table. Your existing ordinance really is just like woefully inconsistent with state legislation, and the Coastal Commission is under a mandate to like just expedite the processing of these ordinances. So we'll know more in December as to whether we can do that or whether we just need to kind of lump it in and move it all forward in one piece. But the bottom line here is that the city is going to be establishing a very simple, predictable, relatively inexpensive and speedy process for approving permits for ADUs. And the point is to encourage property owners to build those second units and rent them out to local residents. So next slide, please. So before we open it up for questions and comments on ADUs, I want to just talk a little more about how the city can help folks develop ADUs. Sometime early next year, we're going to roll out what we're calling an ADU toolkit. It will be a page on the city's website, and it will have information and links to resources and instructions to help property owners get through this process if they want to do an ADU. So the city already has permission from the city of Fort Bragg to use their pre-approved ADU plans. And we'll be reaching out to the city of Ukiah and Mendocino County as well to see if we might get permission to use their plans. And so ideally, we'll have 4 or 5 sets of different plans available with like different unit sizes and styles and configurations. And using these plans can save property owners $10 or $20 or $1,000 or more by not having to pay architects, engineers, draftspeople to draw up building plans. There's still a need for engineering. So while we say they're pre-approved, it's not like the building permit just gets handed over to you. Like foundations need to be dealt with, drainage and so forth, but it's a start. And then the ADU toolkit will also include information about available grants and financing. Right now, the California Housing and Finance Administration has an ADU grant program that provides property owners with grants of up to $40,000. I mean, these are grants to cover pre-development costs. So this isn't for construction. This is just like all the costs that you incur before you construct, which includes engineering, surveying, if you have to do a mountain beaver survey, if you want to hire an architect, permitting costs, so forth. So these are grants that are available to folks who have an income that's capped at 120% of the area median income, which is considered a moderate income household. So, in Mendocino County, that 120% cap for a family of 2 is about a little over $77,000. For a family of 4, it's a little over $96,000. So hopefully that would capture a subset of property owners who are interested in doing ADUs in Point Arena. We'll also provide information about bank financing, and there's financing is available through Freddie Mac, which is another federal program where you can get a construction loan for an ADU that the qualification for it are based on or include the rental income that you expect to get from the ADU. So that's a great opportunity to help people through this process. And then the other thing that we're looking at is the city was recently notified of it's about $400,000 worth of housing funds that are allocated to the city over the next 5 years with very restricted subset of uses. But our recommendation to the city council, which will be moving forward as just an informational item at next week's city council meeting, and then we'll be bringing it back to the council for action in November, is that those funds be set aside for ADU grants and loans, and also housing rehabilitation grants and loans. So we're thinking those might be in the $40,000 or $50,000 range. So there are some hooks, and requirements that go with the funding, and we'll provide a more detailed report on that at the next council meeting. But the point is, accessory dwelling units are a form of infill housing in your community that, almost every lot could do one if they wanted to, or every property owner, 1 or 2, actually, because you can do both an accessory dwelling unit and a junior accessory dwelling unit under state law. And so right now there's some limitations because you're operating under the existing ADU regulations, but once we get the new regulations certified by the Coastal Commission, you'll be operating under a set of regulations that are consistent with the laws. So at this point, I'm going to take a pause and ask, are there any questions or comments about ADUs? Okay, not seeing any, so we're going to slowly move on to the next slide. So the last topic, I guess it's the second to last topic for this evening's presentation, is just an introduction to possible changes to the highway, commercial, and the multifamily residential zones. So this slide on this map, this is your zoning map for the city. And if you look at the orange parcels with MR on them, those are the multifamily zones. So they're located, at the east end of School Street, across from the elementary school, along Riverside Drive as you kind of go up the hill from the intersection with Main Street, along Port Road, between Port Road and Iverson, and then at the end of Mill Street. So those are the multifamily residential zones, and we're going to go on to that. I want to also point out the pink zones, which are the highway commercial zones. And that area, those areas are located at the north end of town and at the south end of town. Okay, next slide, please. So possible changes to the multifamily zones are, for the MR zone, our primary recommendation is going to be that the city consider increasing the allowable density. Right now, it has a maximum allowable density of 7.5 dwelling units per acre, which is actually what like a standard suburban residential neighborhood. That's a really standard zoning for a single family homes on single family lots. So if the city wants its multifamily zoning to encourage development of attached units or stacked units, like duplexes, triplexes, and so forth, to create more affordable rental and homeownership opportunities. Increasing the allowable density in this zone is one way to get there. So when we bring this back to the council for discussion, and again, this will be in December, we'll prepare a slideshow that will help people understand and visualize what 7.5 dwelling units per acre means versus 12 dwelling units per acre, 15 dwelling units per acre. So you can get a really good sense of like what it means in terms of kind of what the housing types look like, how much open space or yards you have on lots and so forth. We also think that the city should consider modifying the usable open space requirement in the MR zone. Right now, there's a requirement that in addition to required yards and parking, that 15% of the lots be maintained for usable open space. And I think we need to kind of drill down into that and really understand what that means. And so we'll be coming back with some analysis, some graphics to help understand it, and potentially some recommendations for modifying that. And then lastly, the city committed in its housing element to take a look at reducing parking requirements as a means of allowing for more housing. And so I realize this is a complicated issue, but we're going to help the council hash it out and take that on. So again, that conversation will start in December. So that's what we're looking at for multifamily residential changes. And I think right now we'll just like take a pause. And if anyone has comments or questions, Jennifer.
Yeah, I know we're not going into this exactly right now, but I just want us to remember that when you start breaking down how much of your lot can be covered with building, you got to realize that some people are not necessarily going to use multi-unit property for multiple units. That people will put whatever they want on the lot. So I don't know how that gets controlled, or how that get like, if you say, well, you can have so much of your lot covered with buildings, and somebody builds a house and has 15 sheds for, I don't know, fixing cars or whatever greenhouses, whatever. I'm just saying, I don't know how you get to how the city makes that percentage and then has people follow it. I'm looking at a multiple unit lot that has one house on it, and the way it is on there is no way they're going to get more housing on it. It just wasn't built that way. So,
Right. That's
so I know we're not doing this now, but I just want to make sure that gets into the conversation somehow at some point when we do start talking about that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there are lots of ways to deal with that, but it's something that needs to be addressed. So thank you, Jennifer. Lisa. And you're still on mute.
I'm so sorry about that. Hang on here. Okay, I have a question, and I think my question is concerning outside of Point Arena, but I had a friend who lived here who had huge acreage just up on Curly Lane, so just barely outside of city limits. I'm not sure of his acreage, but it was something like 530 acres. And they made him tear down a house. They actually, I assume it's Coastal Commission. I didn't quiz him on this, but they made him tear down 2 houses actually, so that he could do this. And one of the houses I actually rented for a short period of time. he had to take the bathroom out before, anyway, it was crazy what ended up happening. And to me, it was shameful. What I mean by that is these houses just needed to be refurbished, and then families could have lived in them, and it was just this crazy situation. Anyhow, so I'm going to go back to me now, and in where I am, I built on an existing footprint. I'm right within the city limits. I'm at the southern end of town, and surrounded by what I consider to be undevelopable property. I hold myself to be a conservator of the property. Anyhow, that's neither here nor there, but to take care of it and tend it and pass it on. But they changed the laws just as I was building. I built my place. I tore down the existing building, and I had to be 50 feet, and I think I ended up being, I don't know, 54 feet away from the center of the riparian zone, the creek. And had the current law been in effect, that's Point Arena Creek. And it had the current law been, my home would be in my neighbor's yard, and there'd be nowhere on this parcel that I would be allowed to build because I'm surrounded by creek, not mountain beaver, but by creek. Anyhow, I'm not quite sure what my question is, but I find this very fascinating because, not that I want to keep developing, but it was just so challenging to get anything done. I jumped through all the hoops and did it and was successful. But anyway, I guess I'll just be quiet and see if you have an answer, Linda. You're laughing, and I know it's so
No, I'm not laughing. I just want to say, like, thank you for your comments. The first scenario of someone having to actually remove functional housing units is just abhorrent and really, really a bad story. And I believe it and I understand it. I've worked in the coastal zone of California for my entire adult life. And I've heard those stories. I've seen them. So that's just really unfortunate, and congratulations to you for working your way through the system. And now why I was smiling is, like, we are really hoping that through the process that we're undertaking of modifying the city's LCP, that we can make it easier. And it's not going to be like less protective of environmentally sensitive habitat like stream corridors or Point Arena mountain beavers, but we want to create processes that are simpler, that are more predictable, that are less expensive. We don't want people having to spend money on surveys that are kind of pointless. Like, I mean, the 500-foot buffer for the Point Arena mountain beaver habitat encompasses like most of your town. So, our hope is that we can just, help create a less onerous set of regulations for property owners. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. Is there anyone else who has a comment on multifamily? Lisa, you have your hand up again?
I did, and it's just nice and short. Hang on, I'm going to double here. I love the thing on the last slide that you had, where you're doing or recommending or creating step-by-step instructions on the permitting process. I think that's fabulous, and thank you so much. I had to do it literally step by step when I was doing it, and it was insane. And I've heard that from so many people who have been trying to do things over the last little bit. People who were trying and actually failed and moved out of town because they could not do it. It's great. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, so let's move on to the next slide, or we are on the next slide, which are possible changes to the highway commercial or the HWC zone. So as you might recall on that map that we showed a couple slides back, the highway commercial zones are located kind of on either side of the highway on the north end of town and on either side of the highway at the very south end of town. And one of the items that we're looking at is the potential recommendation for a highway mixed use zone, just like creating a different zoning category at the north end of town for the highway commercial properties, and then leaving the highway commercial zone at the south end intact as is. At least I think your property is in that south end zone. So if there's things that you think we should be doing down there, we can, we should definitely have that discussion too. But the idea behind the new highway mixed use district would be to allow residential development on an equal footing with commercial development up on the north end of town, where there are vacant properties, including the one city-owned parcel. And there's also some, properties that have some development, but definitely have infill potential. So the idea is to make that an area where you could actually have some new multifamily housing. And there we're thinking more, potentially of apartment units, particularly on the city piece, which we'll get to next. So for the changes to this, or the new highway mixed use zone, we would want to increase the allowable density from 15 dwelling units per acre now, probably to something closer to 20, with allowable density bonuses for affordable housing. And again, we'll come back to the council with some tools to help you visualize density. So the goal is to encourage apartments and to get that economy of scale that will actually make multifamily development feasible. So the other thing that, absolutely needs to be changed if the council wants to see this happen is that there's currently a requirement in the highway commercial zone that residential units can occupy no more than 25% of the parcel, and that it needs to be placed on the back 40% of the lot. So that just isn't going to cut it. And so at this point, instead of stopping for questions right here, I'm going to move to the next slide because it's about the city's piece, which is in this zone. And I just want to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll open it up for questions. So the city owns this piece that's, across from City Hall, just south of the Cypress Grove. Cypress, whatever it is, Cypress Meadows subdivision. It's a little over 2 acres. It has the highway commercial zoning, and the city's interested in developing it for housing. As Eli mentioned earlier, we've gotten some early feedback from the survey results. The two uses that got the highest scores or feedback were apartments and co-housing, which is a kind of housing that basically has housing units with some shared living facilities, some communal facilities. In terms of developing the property, the city is going to need to enter into a partnership with a housing developer. And, we have two nonprofit housing developers who are active on the coast. One is RCHDC, which is Redwood Rural Community Housing Development Corporation, and the other is Danco, which is an affordable housing developer out of Eureka. The city's initial conversations with the affordable housing developers have not been too promising, in part because of the limitations of the highway commercial zoning regulations. So, the first order of business is to modify those regulations so that you can get a project on, that that somebody will develop. And, for an affordable housing project, typically there's an economy of scale where you need a minimum of 30 units in order to get the funding for a project. So let's just move to the next slide. And I just want to kind of talk you through what the development process would look like for the city-owned piece. So the first order of business is to recruit and select a nonprofit housing development partner. Then you enter into an agreement for the pre-development phase, which is like all the planning and permitting and so forth. Develop conceptual plans, do the environmental review and permitting, and then assemble all the financing, which, a lot of the funding for affordable housing is either through low-income housing tax credits, or there's a number of state programs now that are funding affordable housing. Then you enter into a purchase and sale agreement with the developer for the property, and then prepare construction plans, get building permits, build it, and occupy it. So that's like, in the best of worlds, we're talking about probably a 4 to 5 year process, which is good because it actually gives us a little bit of time to get the changes to the LCP through the Coastal Commission process. At next week's council meeting, we're going to be briefing the council and the community on a funding opportunity to help incentivize affordable housing development. And this isn't the one I was talking about earlier with the ADU grants and the housing rehab grants, but it's another funding opportunity. This is actually a competitive grant known as the Regional Early Action Planning Grant Program. And our recommendation to the council is going to be that we apply for funds for a grant to help with the first, the first 4 bullet points. And we're thinking probably a grant somewhere around $400,000 to help offset the pre-development costs and just get the ball rolling. So so you can tune in next week for that if you'd like. But at this point, I'd just like to pause and say, are there any questions or comments on what we're talking about in terms of changes for the highway commercial zoning, or for the city, or any comments or suggestions for the city-owned parcel? Okay, I think, I'm not sure I have everyone on my screen here. No, I don't. Okay, well, with that said, we will just move to the next slide, which is, and these are just our wrap-up slides. So the next steps in our process, we have a city council meeting next week, Tuesday, October 25th. I believe the council's actually doing hybrid meetings now, so you can either go in person or join via Zoom. And at that meeting, we'll be updating the city council on these 2 upcoming grant opportunities and making our recommendations, and just hearing from the council if, they want us, it's a time to do course corrections or refinements, hear from the community. And then in November at the city council meeting, we'll be bringing those 2 grant resolutions back for council action. And the grant deadlines are November 30th for one, and the other one is towards the end of December. But between those 2 meetings, we are hoping to conduct a listening session with that Action Network is going to host. And this will be, as Eli mentioned, a session with a translator that they're going to provide. We're not quite clear on whether it's going to be a hybrid meeting or in person or not, but once we get a date on that, we'll get the word out, and we'll get it out in bilingual format, and hopefully they can get their people to come. And then lastly, I've made a lot of references to the December 13th City Council meeting. And at that meeting, our plan is to conduct a work session that will actually follow up on a lot of the concepts that we've brought forward this evening. We'll have a final report on the community survey. We'll seek council direction regarding modifications to the ADU ordinance, to the highway commercial and the multifamily residential zoning regulations. We might have something on tiny home regulations by then, and probably some more. So we're making a lot of headway. We're really excited to be doing this, and also like super pleased with the level of community response and input that we're getting. So I just want to thank you all again. I have one more slide, which is just a list of how to stay informed. And you're probably the people who least need this list since you're here. But, we do have a pretty robust housing update page on the city's website. There's an email list that you'll get email blasts about things that are going on. The city is great about using social media to get the word out. The ICO is, just like in my mind, the best independent newspaper probably in the world, but certainly in Mendocino County. And, please talk to your city council members. And so I want to just show this last slide because it's beautiful, which is, this is a drone photo of Point Arena that was shot by Mayor Scott Ignacio. And I just want to say you have a really beautiful town with a bright future. And thank you so much for letting us help you solve the housing puzzle. So if there's any other comments or questions, I'm happy to listen and to respond. And otherwise, I just want to say thank you all so much for coming tonight. And I'm not seeing anybody's hands go up. So I will say before we just turn off the meeting, that I will be preparing a summary of this meeting and comments that'll go up on the city's website. And I see Olivia's hand. But so there'll be a summary, and we also have recorded it, and that recording will be there so you can have people watch it. And anybody who has comments or questions that weren't answered tonight, feel free to contact me via email. My email is linda@nccplanning.com. And Olivia, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hi, thank you. A couple of things. This is, when you say summary, is that the full housing survey summary that will be available, or just a summary of tonight?
No, yeah, it's just a summary of tonight's comments, and it'll be similar to the summary that we did with the first workshop. So, and then
will you release the housing survey summary once it's final after November 11th?
The housing survey summary will be provided for the December council meeting. So it will be released in advance of that meeting, but I can't tell you when. And it's not, the summary, yeah. There's a lot of work to be done to, like Eli said, to really unpack the results and correlate them. And
yeah, absolutely. I think it's important data, and I feel like we haven't had that much comprehensive, anytime we do a community survey and we get that many responses, it's always really helpful because we don't really have an opportunity often to get that much widespread community input. And so it is really important data, even if it's qualitative, to be able to go back to.
Absolutely. And we agree with that. And, for the community survey, I think we can commit to, to releasing all of the responses. I will say for the property owner survey, we do have a commitment to disaggregate the information about specific ownership. I think we can do that and still release those too, so that you won't just be getting a report with our analysis and summary of the results, but you can also look at the data, the raw data for yourself, and do with it what you may.
Wonderful. And then my other question is actually for Paul, just because it relates to housing. If he can't answer tonight, that's fine, but just wondering if the public hearing about proposed housing that happened last month is actually happening during next week's city council meeting too, because I feel like everyone here would probably care about that as well. So
Yeah, I assume you're talking about the project at 140 School Street.
mhm.
Yeah, so that actually, we're going to continue that again till November because we have not gotten the information we need that was requested by the council at the last meeting in time. So we plan to bring that to the meeting, but we will continue that hearing until the November 15th meeting.
Got it. So the hearing itself won't continue until the November 15th meeting. Like,
Correct.
got it. Okay, understood. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, any other questions or comments?